Okay, would you mind introducing yourself for the audience, please?
I'm represented by several galleries. I'm have work in several countries. I'm a full-time artist, and I'm happy to be here. Thanks for inviting me. I'm Richard. I want to say that I love your work. I have followed you, I think, longer than you've followed me, and your work is just gorgeous. So,
Thank you
so
very
I'm
much.
honored you wanted to speak with me. And Simon, I just started following you, so I'm looking forward to checking out what you're up to as well.
Yeah, thank you so much. Yeah,
Thank
lovely.
you. And it's lovely to meet you and have you here. And I love your work too. It's beautiful. Simon and I were just talking about it. And
Yeah.
I was looking through to see if you ever painted in acrylic or oil as well as pastel. But you're a pastel artist mainly.
So I started out, I guess I'll give you a little bit of history on that because I actually didn't start with pastel. So I started with acrylic and mixed media, watercolor. I've never really worked in oil. I think once when I was a teenager, one of my friends had oils and I splashed around with it a bit, but took too long to dry. I wasn't interested. I'm way too impatient for that. So yeah, I started out with acrylic and really didn't get into pastels until about 10 years ago. And I really didn't get involved in pastels until about 5 years ago. I mean, I think I bought my first set of pastels a decade ago and was playing around with them. And then when we moved down from Seattle to the Portland area. This is my home where I grew up, and we wanted to be closer to my parents who are getting older, and my husband, our kids, my husband's sons, and their families. And so I like to call them my bonus kids. I don't have any of my own, but I'm thrilled to have them in my life. And so we moved back down here. And when we bought the house, we had a little bit of extra cash, and I bought my first full set of pastels. And that is when I absolutely just went bonkers. I just fell in love with pastel, and I haven't really looked back. I have tons of acrylic and watercolor, and I sometimes incorporate those. But I just am so in love with pastel that I don't ever really get the urge to work on the other mediums. That might change. So hopefully I don't have a billion wasted products out there of acrylic.
Yeah, it's often the case. So I mean, I've got all kinds of media here. I recently bought some casein paint. I wanted to try it. It didn't work out, so it's gone in the drawer of all of those mediums that I've tried over the years. So, Kim, what do you like most about pastel? Is it the directness? Is it the color?
Yes, 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 all of it. I mean, I think that it's definitely the directness and the immediacy. I can take my time. So it's kind of strange because although I love working quickly, I also think a lot about what I'm going to do. I take a lot of breaks. But when I'm at the easel, and I do work standing up at an easel, I like to really slash and be crazy. But then I like to take a lot of breaks and step back and look at my work, either on the phone or whatever. And I like to have the ability to easily make changes. And I feel like the dry pigment, I know that you can do that with any medium, but I guess I feel like it just gives me more options to step back and come back whenever I want to. And it's easier to make those changes than if I was working with, say, a wet medium, especially like watercolor or something, which I find really difficult. I do love acrylics, but I also just love how there's nothing between me and the pigment. It's like my hand directly, there's just, this piece of pigment. A lot of people call it chalk, whatever. I don't really care. I'm not offended if they want to call it drawing or painting. Who cares? It's just a beautiful medium to me. I think of it as painting. but you know, it's just right there in my hands. I love getting my hands dirty with it. And so I also love that it's kind of a drawing medium, so I can do both. It's like the best of both worlds, you know. It's both painting, but if I want to, I could, you know, I do a lot of underpaintings, and I'll do them with acrylic or watercolor or ink or a pastel. Some, you know, if I'm really in a hurry, and I'm a very impatient person, so if I just don't feel like getting all of the watercolors out or anything, I'll just take pastel and rub it on the surface and wash it down with water or alcohol or mineral spirits. And that will give me a beautiful underpainting as well that I can then work on top of. So I just feel like there's a lot of pros. There's so many benefits to working with a dry medium.
Absolutely. I think it's that directness as well of, you know, you've got the medium in your hand. You don't have this brush in the way, or a palette knife or whatever. And
Absolutely.
yeah, I sometimes use oil pastel. You know, I like that because I can really blend. I can use a palette knife if I want as well. So with the underpainting aspect, how important is that to your work?
Well, so a lot of artists work in a particular way, and they have a method that works for them. And I don't really do that because I get bored too easily. So it is important if I decide to do an underpainting, but I often don't do an underpainting. So I think that that's another one of the things that I love about pastel, is that for somebody who has, I don't know, I don't want to denigrate on myself, but somewhat of an addictive personality, I can collect papers. I mean, I guess you could do that with paint, you know, with wet paint. I do have a ton of acrylics as well and watercolors, but there's so many different types of papers, so many options. You know, back in the day, they didn't have that for pastel artists. They just work on laid paper, or, you know, even, I don't know what, non-archival possibly, but a lot of just those laid papers back before all these archival papers became available, and very limited, really just those earth tones that were available back in the day to the masters. But today we have so many options. So I am, I guess, kind of embarrassed to say I've got probably like a little store out there, more papers and pastels than I probably will ever use in my life. But I love having those options. Like Sennelier La Carte is a beautiful French paper that doesn't accept an underpainting, but it's one of my favorite papers to use. And even though it's finicky, I would kind of call it like the Ferrari of papers for pastels, because even though it's finicky and it just like breaks down all the time like a Ferrari might, if you do anything to it that you're not supposed to, or treat it with the respect that it deserves, it also gives you such incredible performance when you do use it properly, and don't blow on it to, you know, because if you get a speck of saliva on it, it's going to break down. Like literally, that's that vegetal grind that they spray on it is how they do it. And it just will completely disintegrate. Now, that said, I actually just finished a piece that's up on my mantle, and I was experimenting because I love to experiment. And so I had recently purchased some casein, which is, I'm kind of tired of using those really toxic fixatives. And I never use a fixative on a finished piece because I don't like it dulls down the brilliance of the crystals, you know, of the multifaceted crystals of the pastel. But oftentimes, depending on how I'm working, if I'm doing a lot of layers, then I'll often, if I've used up the tooth of the paper, then I will spray a fixative to continue to allow myself to work. And so I thought, well, I know that in the past, I've been able to use fixative on Sennelier La Carte paper. And so I thought, well, I'm going to see if I can use casein on it. I knew that I could use these other ones like Latour, it's a Sennelier Latour, or there's some other kinds like Spectrafix, but they're super toxic. But I know they're like hairspray, but they're like archival hairspray, and it's really gross. But these casein based fixatives, which is basically like milk.
Yeah.
And I thought, I don't know if this is going to work because it's not that sticky, gross stuff. So I sprayed it on, and sure enough, I put my finger on it while it was still damp, and some of the grind came off. I was like, oh crap. So I let it dry, and then I took a little bit of clear gesso and just touched those areas where I had touched. Once it dried, it was okay. I love experimenting like that and finding out, is it going to work? And it did, but where I touched it when it was damp, I messed it up. So I just put some clear gesso on there, and it dried, and I was able to save the piece. So, so anyway, I totally veered off course. But when I do, but when I do work with pieces, papers that I can do an underpainting on, I do think that those are some of my most successful pieces, because even though Sennelier La Carte is my favorite paper to work on, maybe just because I'm so direct and I can go slash and go crazy with it, if I take the time and effort to do an underpainting, it really does so much of the work for me, and it's like, it saves the pastel, because pastel is expensive. I mean, it's like $6 for one stick of pastel. If you get a decent archival, and I use all archival stuff, it's really expensive. So if I use underpainting with watercolor or ink, I can really manipulate that and work on it for as long as I want. I mean, you could basically make a finished piece, a finished painting, and then put pastel on top of it gently where you feel like it might enrich the piece that you've already created with wet medium. That's how Richard McKinley, who is huge in the pastel world, I think that he's the president of IAPS, which is the International Association of Pastel Societies. That is one of the ways that he works. And he really kind of pioneered that, I think. He kind of pioneered that method of really creating this almost finished piece, sometimes with an underpainting, and then choosing selectively how much pastel you want to put on top of it.
That's fascinating. I've always seen pastel as painting. There's that thing people say, dry media, it's not painting, but I think it's as close to painting with pure pigment as possible.
Yeah.
I use gouache a lot. Gouache is probably, the closest you can get to pure pigment in wet media, I think, because it's so intense. But I do find that interesting, having the underpainting there. So with it, are you sort of, say, just in the basic sense, getting the tonal, compositional, all of the values in, and then coming in with the highlights with the pastel?
It really just depends on the piece, because I love to experiment so much. Sometimes I will use just ink. Sometimes I'll just use sumi ink, which I love to do, but it's because it's so bold, and in fact, I was just starting a piece last night, and I hadn't used sumi ink in a while. And I realized, once I put it on my little plastic tray and took my little, I don't know, sumi ink brush, that, oh my gosh, I mean, it's just like, it literally turned into I had a white piece of pastel matte, and it turned into a black piece of pastel matte because it was so much that I couldn't control it. And that's fine. I'll use the paper, but what I need to do is water it down, add water on the side, and then you can get these beautiful gradations of the ink, and the type of ink that you use would either be a brown or a bluish tint. And I actually had that on an old plate that had some blue watercolor on it. And so when I dipped in, when I thought, oh, this is way too much, way too black, and it's not giving me the result that I was wanting, it turned into an experimental underpainting and basically turned black at the end. And that's okay. That happens, right? I mean, experimentation is the way that I think that we learn and grow. Absolutely. So that's okay. Yeah, a lot of times, like with this piece, hang on, I'll grab it. It's right here on my mantle. Sometimes I just look at them as I'm working, and after I'm finished, like this piece I just did recently, it's kind of hard to see, but this is not very much pastel. This is mostly a mixture of ink and of ink and watercolor. And then I just put like all of this area is this the paper. This is actually really interesting. It's like a multimedia board. It's almost like if I, you know, really like moved it in two, it would just break straight in half. It's like a really strange type of a paper, but I like it. Anyway, so yeah, so it just depends. Like this one just, I did this. This is pastel. There's a teeny bit of pastel here and here, but it's mostly underpainting.
So
let me put this.
The trees are mostly the underpainting, because this is something I wanted to say as well that I love about your work, how you capture the light behind the trees and coming through the trees. You know, it really is a character in your work that you've got this sort of really bright light from the sun coming through, but then you have these silhouetted trees. It's very hard to do. It's hard to do in oil painting, I find. I've tried it a few times, but I love that about you, because it gives it, first of all, that tonal contrast there, but there's something almost you know, spiritual about it in a way. This kind of thing that, you know, that there's this light that's just creeping through. It's beautiful. Is that what you're inspired by? Do you look for those scenes?
Yes, I do. I think when we moved down here, it's been almost 5 years. You know, before that, I was working mostly in acrylic. I had done this really large body of work. I mean, like 48 by 60 or 72 inches of these really large jazz pieces with like jazz musicians, and completely different. And then when we moved into this place out in the woods, we're outside of the town, and we live on 5 acres. It's just me and my husband. I had a cat, but it died. And now I have a billion birds, and there's a hawk out there trying to eat my birds right now, but squirrels, raccoons, everything, deer. We've had porcupines, you know, I mean, we've had a black bear run through the field. But anyway, I've got all this inspiration. I can walk out my front door, and I'm so grateful. I've never lived in the woods before, so I didn't, and it was just I'm so grateful. It is a spiritual experience, honestly, being here and being able to walk outside. And while I'm mostly a studio painter, you know, and it's in my garage, so I can open my studios in my garage. I can open my garage door and look at the Glen, which is the painting I just showed you. I've painted that scene so many times in so many conditions and seasons, and with flowers, or in a horizontal, or a, you know, a portrait, you know, way of painting, that I don't think I'll ever get tired of it. And the sun sets to the west over there, and so I always, unless it's cloudy, as it often is here, but even then we have this beauty of the mistiness of the light coming through, and it's just, it is a never-ending quest, I guess, to paint it. I have this desire to just see the light through the trees. It's just something. See, it's funny that you say that you think it's difficult to paint that, because to me, I was talking to a friend of mine. Her name's Jerry Greenberg. She's she's a pastel artist, and she does still life and portraits. And I think that that's incredibly difficult. I mean, you know, I've tried both, and I do occasionally try my hand at those, because I don't want to get bored. And I do think it's also important to challenge ourselves, you know. And her and I were talking, and she said, you know, and she does these beautiful, beautiful, vibrant, full of life still lifes. And she said, well, oh God, it's so easy to do those, but it's so hard to paint those trees. And I said, I'm laughing. I'm like, all you have to do is just squiggle a bunch of pastel on there, and then just work around it until it turns into a blob that looks like a tree. And she said, no, that's what you do with a still life.
Yeah.
And I thought, no. So it's so funny that I think that what we love, what we are focused on is what we're best at,
Absolutely.
you know?
Yeah.
And
And what we're
because,
as well, I'm surrounded by mostly flat lands with big horizons. So of course, and big skies. So of course, that is what's around me. So what I've been painting most. It's interesting then when I go and do a still life to challenge myself or I'm inspired, I'm like, damn, this is hard. Because it's different. I'm used to having this
totally.
huge sort of space to think about. And with a still life, it's much more intimate.
Yeah.
But you get used to it.
Yes. Yes. And I love, I think about even with my landscapes, and even your work is just so incredible. And you also have that light, you also have that light coming through that is just like this beautiful tonal work, and your color, your your eye for color is just incredible.
Thank you.
But I would find it difficult. I find it difficult. One of the most challenging things that I find is if I want to do a piece with a large sky, I always find myself really enjoying and drawn to portrait style instead of a horizontal format. I really love and having a really high horizon line and really focusing. It's not something that I consciously decided on. It's just something that has happened over time. You know how artists, beginning artists, want, oh, well, how do I find my style? Or, and there's no answer to that except to paint. And just paint what you love and practice, paint a billion times, paint 1,000 pieces and throw half of them away and paint like you have all the money in the world to paint, because otherwise, you have to find the technical skill before you can then use those technical skills to then actually say something.
Yeah.
And once you have the technical skill, then there's the whole new challenge of, well, now how am I going to actually communicate this thing that's inside that, words can't say, that I want to share with another human being, that the only way that I can truly express it is hopefully through this painting, that I can, that will speak more than the cliche of 1,000 words, but it's true, right? That's what that challenge becomes. So for me anyway, I feel like I've just kind of, that's what I love, I guess, is this high horizon line with the sun peeking through up there through the trees and this field, because that's what I'm surrounded by. So when I see like the work behind you, which obviously I know is yours, and there's this big, beautiful sky, and it's got all of these really intricate gradations of color and these beautiful, subtle, soft edges of just melding into each other, and I love that. Your values are spot on, but you've got all, these pinks and warm grays. I'm just looking at that beautiful piece with that sun peeking over the horizon, the square format.
It's actually a work in progress. I've just put it in the frame to try and see it different. But it's interesting what you're saying there about the high horizons and things like that. I've always been sort of interested in sort of the rule of 2/3 in the paintings, so 2/3 sky to it. But most of my paintings are almost exactly the same. I'm just shifting the things up or where the cloud's coming in. But within that, like you were saying about the trees and your view, within that, there's so much to experiment with. If you can find a kind of a sort of a formula, in a sense, a framework, it then gives you that whole scope for experimentation, for abstraction, for all kinds of stuff. And excuse me, that's something for me when it really clicked. I think beforehand I was trying to paint like loads of different things, but when I found that formula, and a lot of it was from the views that I see, it was like, now I've got this, I can just play around and focus on things like value, atmosphere, texture. So it's similar with you, with your views.
Absolutely, yes. Before I really started in pastel and before we moved here, in fact, 5 years ago, right when we moved here, I had a period of time where I hadn't painted for almost 3 years. We all as artists go through different things. And then when I bought that new set of pastels and really took off with that, I just went crazy with the pastels. And before that, I had never taken a workshop. I'm I don't like to say self-taught, but I never had a formal education. I guess I am self-taught, but through looking at other people's work and reading and watching videos and things. But I did, in the last few years, started taking some workshops. And I took a workshop with a lady, another pastel artist, and she talked exactly about what you just brought up. And that is that she actually uses almost the exact same, and she's a very well-known artist, in the pastel world anyway, which maybe we're insulated. And in fact, this year I'm going to join this next year the American Impressionist Society because I want to branch out of my little bubble. But she talked exactly about that, how she uses the same formula, in fact, the same photograph, because she's mainly a studio painter, as am I. And the same photograph and the same shapes, because we're magicians, right? We're taking these shapes and we're creating something beautiful out of shape and value. And there's so much to explore. And that really did kind of open my eyes to the idea that, hey, I don't have to go out and find, which I don't really have trouble doing, but it's just find something new every day to, a completely new composition. That's not what it's about. I mean, one of the most helpful things that I ever did was I watched a video from Richard McKinley. He was the gentleman I was talking about, the artist I was talking about earlier, who had, kind of taught a lot of us pastelists to use these very more intricate, more worked on, developed underpaintings. He said one of the best things you can do is take one subject, one composition, one photo reference, and paint it 10 times in 10 different ways. Whether it be make it a nocturne, make it just a tonal study, make it, whatever. I mean, use texture, don't use texture, make it, a daylight scene, turn it into these different, play with all of those things, use a different paper, use, whatever. And that was the best thing I ever did as an artist, because it opened up the realm of possibilities that, hey, I can take that scene right there that I showed you, for example, and turn it into, a completely different scene. I could make it monochromatic. I could make it whatever I want. I'm the artist. Nobody can tell me what to do with it. I can go, spray casein on that piece of La Carte and ruin it if I want to. But you know what? I might make a masterpiece out of it because I tried something new. So I really think that feeling of trying something new and not being afraid. And, it's hard sometimes, I will say, because there is a balance of wanting, once you've become an established artist and you're in galleries and, you're in exhibits and things like that, you can get pigeonholed, and it's hard because, you want to please your audience. I mean, let's face it, we're artists and we want people to like our work. I don't want to just do it in a vacuum and show the squirrels, and say, do you like this? Here's a peanut if you'll clap for it. I mean, you want human beings to connect with your work, and so especially like if I'm on social media, where I do get a lot of my audience comes from, it's where I've been recognized by two of the galleries I'm in and found, and opportunities arise and such. So, you know, it's hard to say maybe always want to have that experimental attitude with, say, floral. I'm looking at some flowers my husband bought me and want to go out and paint. And if it's not perfect, put it on Instagram, because I know that it's not going to get very many likes. And as a human being that's highly sensitive, I'm an artist, and oh, nobody liked my flowers, I don't want to put those up. Or having that feeling of, oh, I have to perform, I have to put something up in 3 days, or the logarithm is not going to favor me, you know. And I talk to my husband about these things. Poor guy, he listens lovingly, of course, and then goes and builds guitars, or he doesn't care. I mean, of course he cares about what I do, and but he'll listen, as a good husband should. But so it's nice to be able to talk to other artists who would understand these things.
Yeah.
You know, when social media is your way of getting yourself out there.
Yeah.
It's something
to
to
go back
balance.
to something you were saying about, and I was just, I've got some examples. So people who listen to this on the podcast audio won't see these, but I'll describe. So getting a bit of backlight from.
That's okay. I can see what you're talking about.
You see these simple designs here.
Yes.
So this is what in my classes when I teach, often I would just draw these up on the wall. Now they're so basic and crude. You know, you can see there that that's a seascape. There's a little bit there.
Yeah, excellent. Yeah.
And so just for those listening, the rectangles with just basic horizon line clouds coming across.
Yes.
And I'll put those on the wall and say, just paint however you want, but look at that composition. You know, it could be summer, winter, autumn, spring. It could be a cloudy day, it could be a sunny day. You could use pink for the sky and black for the sea, whatever, just paint. And within that framework of something, it gives people more scope, I think, for learning the language of how to paint. I tend not to encourage, if I'm teaching people to paint from photographs, if we do, to say, right, let's look at this for 2 minutes and then turn it off and use your memory to do it. So you're giving yourself that thing to learn the language of the medium you're using more than the language of photography. And, you know, it's funny, I think most of the artists that we've had on here so far are purely observational artists. And I've got this different approach where I go off and I walk around and then come back and usually just paint from my memory because it's based on that simple composition. So it's nice to hear what you were saying.
Yes. And, you know, I think it's interesting. You know, I do get out and do some plein air, but I do think, you know, people have very differing ideas of what's most convenient. I would think that probably watercolor, honestly, would be the most convenient plein air medium because it's just so easy to pack around. And for me, you know, I mostly am a studio painter, and I do work mostly from my photographs that I take on my property or walking around. However, they often turn into something completely different than what I started with. And oftentimes the camera, I'll just work straight off of my iPhone. And what I'll do is I'll go look through my thumbnails. I have thousands of paintings. I mean, I don't think my iCloud has been updated in months or whatever they call it. I don't know, but because I have so many, you know, I don't care, but I'll go through and look on the thumbnails and say, ooh, that's an interesting looking shape. I think I could do something with that. And then I'll pull it up, and I'm pretty spontaneous. So, however, I do highly recommend doing a little thumbnail like that, like you just showed us for the people that the artists that may be watching. And if I'm not sure, if I don't, it's very often that the little snap on your camera, that you're going to get isn't perfect. There's going to be things you're going to need to do to tweak that composition, in order to make it, a more pleasing composition. So in that case, I will often do exactly what you just showed and draw it out. And then I'll work from my photo reference. And hopefully I like to choose references that I've taken more recently, because then I can remember what it was like there, but honestly, with working with pastels, I have so many pastels and I work with a lot of other things. I use a razor, I'll use a palette knife, I'll use other things within my paintings to scrape or do things that I want to do to create the texture that I want, or to get rid of pigment. That I also don't like bugs, which is really bad for living in the country. So I just don't want them, eating my legs or, any horrible, gross things. And so I mostly work in my studio. Now, a lot of people would say, oh, the best way to work is in plein air or directly from observation if you're a still life painter. And that's fine. I think just like if somebody wants to call pastel chalk, that's great. I'm just doing what I love. And you know what? I'm not going to put the rules on myself. Do what makes you happy. And if it's a nice sunny day and there's not a lot of bugs, then I'll say, you know what? I'm going to go out on the deck or out on the gravel road and bring my pastels and I'll paint something directly from observation. I don't think that there's any wrong way to paint. I mean, that said, of course, you'd never want to paint from somebody else's, don't copy other people's work. It's not the way, I know that a lot of beginning artists like to do that. If it's an old master or something, that's fine. And copyright free, but the way that you're going to learn your own style and what you love is by experimenting and painting things that you love that are in your life.
Absolutely. Simon, do you have a question I've been asking?
No, I've been really enjoying it. I always do. I will take the opportunity for anyone who is listening. There is a YouTube channel, so feel free to check out the video here where you can see all of the lovely visuals we provide. But yeah, with you mentioning thumbnails, it made me think about looking at your account on Instagram. The thumbnails are obviously so beautiful. I love them. And then there's this meme on Instagram about how artists look at artwork differently than non-artists do. So non-artists will look at a painting at a reasonable distance, whereas artists will look at it, an inch away from the actual surface. I do the same thing when I looked at your images on Instagram. I was zooming in, just mesmerized, because it does look as though everything is spiraling around. There's so much movement in there and life. That has to happen at a later stage of the painting, because you can't build from movement, because you have to do it in layers. Can you talk about your process of how you create that type of life in your work?
Yeah, so I think that as I have progressed as an artist, I've actually slowed down in my process in the last year. So I really think of my journey. My husband is funny because he says, oh, you're so well known, because I'm not, by the way, but I mean, I'm in an exhibit in Taiwan right now, and I've been in international exhibits, and I do have pieces around the world, but he's like, oh, you became an overnight sensation. It only took a decade. It's a joke that it takes a lot of hard work. But anyway, as far as how I go about working, I think that it's constantly changing. But to address what you're asking, I start with the big shapes, so if I see, I always like to think of like the 80-20 rule, and it works in so many ways in a painting. So It doesn't have to be exactly 80-20, but that will always create the drama. Like if I squint and look at that square format piece behind you that I like so much, Richard, that's so beautiful, I can see that it's 80% light and about 20% dark, you know, and it's 80%. I mean, there's so many different of neutral colors, and maybe 10 or 15% of these saturated colors. You know, you can look at it that in so many ways, even saying, oh, I'm 80% finished, so I'm going to step away so I don't overwork my painting. And I think that that's one of the most important things that I've come to realize myself, is that in the last few years, I'm such a spontaneous painter that I would stand out there and do a painting every day that would be a completely finished painting. And these days, I've really slowed down, and I don't slow down at the easel, but I slow down by stopping a lot. I take a lot of breaks and think about what I'm going to do. And then when I go back out, I can be creative and spontaneous and not worry about, I'm not ever going up. I mean, I can't say never, excuse me, but I will occasionally go up to the painting and put in some careful highlights or accents at the end. But most of the time, it is stepping back 30 feet, looking at what it needs, coming and looking at it 10 feet, 5 feet, 1 foot, and saying, here's what it needs. And instead of trying to very carefully control my hand, because I'm not a realist painter, and while I appreciate it and it's gorgeous and I love all kinds of work, that's not what I'm going for. I want to create that impression of aliveness and swirls and the beauty of the wild. Then I'm not really that concerned about the actual mark I'm making. I'm more concerned about, did I get it in the general area of the piece that I want? Do I have the value right? Do I have the saturation and is it warm or cool, that type of thing? And let me get it in that particular area, but boom, it's done. And leave it and don't go back and mess with it, right? I mean, that's the goal. Some of the time it works, and some of the time I'm out there cussing like a sailor and pulling my hair out and working over a painting like this and really unhappy with it and forcing it to work. And sometimes they do. And then the magic happens in other pieces where everything comes together and you have that channeling of whatever that magic is. And there are no redos and scraping offs. It happens both ways. And unfortunately, the magic doesn't, those moments, you know, those paintings aren't as often, honestly, as the scraping off cursing paintings, but it's part of being an artist.
Yeah, it certainly is. You were saying about that, and I was talking to someone the other day about that thing of sometimes, you know, some of my best paintings I've done, you know, between 15 minutes, half an hour to an hour. I've just walked in and just done it. And it's I've sort of said all that needs to be said in a sentence. Often I have to write an essay, right? It's that thing. And that flow state it's not predictable as an artist, but you've got to keep doing it. And again, like your advice to artists as well, just keep practicing and doing. And even when you are, you know, 10 years down the line, or you're professional or whatever, you don't suddenly become like just this flowing energy all of the time. There are days, and sometimes they are more than the ones where the magic happens, where you are really, really up against it. But it's about how you work through those things, and that's where the learning comes from, isn't it? Because you push yourself and you try something, and you think, I haven't tried that before, and it happens.
Yeah. I have a pile of failed paintings out there. I mean, in a butcher tray that, you know, are just waiting because The materials are expensive. Paper, archival paper for an artist is expensive. And so one day I may go out and use those to rework, or, most likely just wash it down and start a new painting. Occasionally, if I'm tearing my hair out enough, it's somewhat liberating to just go and throw it in the trash, and say, I'm done. It's been 2 days. I've working on this thing. It's not, my vision is not being realized. But you can't think of it as a wasted 2 days. It's hard not to sometimes, of course, because as artists, we're usually highly sensitive and emotional people. And we want all of our work to be perfect, but that's not how it is. That's not reality, at least for me. I have those days and paintings that nobody sees. And my husband says, at least he's honest. I have this honest critic here, which is wonderful. So those times happen, and it's going to happen. And it's part of the, it's not all perfect, beautiful, butterflies and unicorns. I mean, it's not the way it is, but it's worth it. It's all worth it because I'm doing what I love. And, I've had a girl in school somewhere in the UK actually write me and say, I mean, this is just an example, like, wow, your art is so inspirational to me. Can I do a report on it for school? Or you make me want to become an artist. And to feel like there's so much pain and horrible wars and terrible things happening in the world, and that will continue to happen and have happened since the beginning of humanity, that, sometimes it feels like, am I really should I be out in the Peace Corps somewhere and actually making a difference? But I think that we can all make a difference doing the little things every day. And if I can, that might sound trite, but I actually really, truly believe that. And it's, not just, but since we're talking about painting here, that's what I'm going to focus on when I say that, because if I can make somebody smile and make somebody happy, or, have somebody write me and say, wow, Kim, your painting just made my day. And I'm going back, I use it as wallpaper on my phone. And when I'm stressed out, I look at it and it calms me down. Thank you. That is making a difference. It's like a little ripple that we can all make this difference. And so when I think, oh, what am I just, scribbling on a piece of paper, and it's nothing, I could be doing more in the world. I don't want to think of it that way. I think that we all every day can do something, and even if it's just bringing beauty into the world, it's much, much needed.
Absolutely. And art is one of those things that it brings that beauty. It's like music, in the sense that, it's needed. Life is difficult, right? So having music and having art as respite, as inspiration, aesthetic. But I think with painting as well, and I get this a lot, is that it also inspires other people to paint and to want to be artists. And, not just from teaching it for me, but I get loads of DMs or comments where people saying, I want to start, I want to do this. And I'm always there to give that advice, because I think, it's important that, in a way that, as practicing artists, we get to that point where we've got something to share, that experience. And sometimes it can be like the most basic things. If someone says, what color did you use up there? And, what mix was that? Or someone saying, I want to start pastel painting. What colors would you recommend? And being able to do that is because that person might be going through great difficulty or something like that. And just to be able to share that. So I totally agree with what you're saying.
Oh, absolutely. And I love to teach. In fact, I was teaching from, I've taught on Patreon twice, and I've quit twice. I love teaching. I do have YouTube, and I have some, you can just look up my name if you're listening to this and you want to see some of my videos on there. But I'm also teaching on Pastel Live next year. I'm doing the Essentials day. I'm teaching probably like an hour workshop for them. But I think that it's a beautiful thing to share what we love to do. And the only problem that I had with it, because I was teaching on Patreon for a while earlier this year, is that it's a lot of work because I put everything into what I do. And so maybe I'll eventually put them on YouTube or something and just give them out for free. That might be a nice thing to do, actually. I mean, because I have dozens and dozens of these videos, and I shut it down because as much as I love teaching, I want to just put everything into it and give everybody as much as I can. I have no holds barred on any knowledge. I feel like, why not give it to another generation? When I'm dead, maybe some of me will come through their work because they learned something from me. But it takes so much work, and then all the video editing, that I didn't have time to make a single large work for a gallery. I mean, I haven't, I finally had to quit in June. I did it for 3 months, and I'm like, all I do is do these demos. And as much as I love it and I want to help others, it's a balancing act.
Absolutely.
Just like social media and taking the time to paint, and then you have to market yourself. If only we had, I could hire a marketing person or something, but that's just not the reality of it. I have to go respond. And I mean, I love responding and I love talking to people, and I love doing all of that, but it is also, let's be honest, it's time consuming.
Absolutely. We've talked to, and what I'll do just quickly here, so I've got to go in about 10 minutes max, because I'm teaching online. so
no problem.
If this is all right with you, Kim and Simon, maybe we can do a part 2 at some point, because like there's so much also I want to talk to you about colours and pastel and all of that kind of stuff. Maybe we could do a part 2.
Yeah, it doesn't seem long enough to be with you, but I was going to try to use the segue of you mentioning YouTube.
Yeah.
Where is it our listeners or viewers should go to see your work and support you?
Well, they can find me and my work at kimeshelman.com. So it's KIMESHELMAN.com. And if I have workshops going on, I do post them there on my website. You can see the galleries I'm in. You can see the current exhibits that I'm in, upcoming exhibits. And, I'm also, like I said, I have some videos, just some teaching short videos on YouTube. Just plug my name in. I honestly don't remember what my handle is or anything. You can find me on Instagram. It's Kim_Eshelman. And yeah, that's the best way to find me. I have a business page on Facebook, Kim Eshelman Fine Art. So you can find me there as well.
Oh, fantastic. Well, all of the links for that will be in the description of this video. You've been really generous with your time. I hope we do get to have a part 2 with you, because it's been lovely talking to you. Thank you.
You as well. Thank you so much for having me.